Welcome everybody, you're watching Mr. Fugu Data Science. Today we will be doing data wrangling. Yeehaw! If you're looking for data cleaning, that's in a separate video, look at the card above. Also I put a disclaimer, so feel free to look at that. I think it's very useful. You need to import tidyverse and knitr today. It's pretty easy. Let's evaluate some data we've used before. Let you see what we're going to manipulate in the beginning, which will be this date time. If you notice, it's set up as month, day, year, hour, minute. One way to handle these data is using mutateat with this little piping that you can use from the tidyverse, where we're separating our month, day, year, hour, minute. And mind you, this is only one way to set this up. Once you do this, you notice that we have a date time format for the class, and it's set up as the year, month, day, since I did not designate the formatting that I would like, for instance, as in the US versus the rest of the world. Subsetting your data, for instance, if I had the column of country, but I wanted to exclude any rows that had the United Kingdom in that, we can do that as well. One other way of parsing the date time, these few examples I'm just running through real fast since I've set these up in a previous video, but I felt they were useful to go over once again. We can do the strip time, call in the formatting of our data, and then decide to store however you would like to store it. And this is how I'm calling it in. Saving the regular date, saving the hour, the day, the month, the year, month, day. That's what you get printed off here. We could do some abbreviations for the month names, as well as calling in a string f time and call in the %a so we can get the day of the week. So now we have the name of the month as well as the day of the week if we needed to use that for some reason. You can create a new column in a few ways. I'll show you two. This is one of them, where you just take the two columns of interest that I'm using here, multiplying them together, creating a sales total column. Scroll down, that's what I have here. If I have two data frames that I'm interested in putting into one data frame side by side, I'll use a cbind. If I was doing it row wise, I would do rbind, which is pretty simple. So we'll be getting into the tidyr, which is basically the focus of today. But for instance, if you wanted to subset your data, this is one way you could take a few specific columns, throw them in here, print that off. For instance, if this is what you were looking for some customer that had some specific sales by the day of the week, sure, we could take that. Let's move on to some data I made up by some items A, B, and C. We'll have a mean and a standard deviation. And if I wanted to manipulate these data, I could go from wide to long data, and we could do the gather function, taking our data, call in our columns that we would like to manipulate, and then you need some kind of key and you need a value. And if you notice, this is going to look kind of strange. So the column that we had for our mean and the column we had for our standard deviation were now rotated. So the value that you have your key here of mean and standard deviation, and then a new column which is the values of this. Where would this be useful? For instance, this type of data is useful for humans to visualize. Setting up your data like this can be useful if you're doing some kind of data analysis. It just depends on the situation of what you need, but you have these options. We can use something called separate, going the reverse, taking some long data and making it wide instead, where I'm taking my invoice data. So let's look at what that is real quick. So here's your invoice here that we're separating into more columns. So for instance, this is in a long format for this column. And now we're going to expand this data into a wider formatting. And I'm spreading it into all of these columns here for that vector. Now we have a month, day, year, hour, minute that we just expanded these data into. That's another way to manipulate these data. We can use something called unite. Unite will allow me to take the minute and the hour and combine those and use a separator. So we'll take these data that we just created. What happened? I created a new column which would be called time, taking in the hour and the minute using a separator for those. Here's the time that we just manipulated. Okay? We can separate rows, so let's look at what this will evaluate to, because we're going to convert one column into more rows. So first, we have these data here, that are rows of strings separated by columns. So think of if you had some list of values or something like that, and you needed to convert it, you're going to have one option to do that with the separate rows. Oh, I got it right here. So we can separate our rows, where we're going to do this by the shoe types, which is this column, and it's separated by commas. So now you went with 6 rows, and now you have what, like 8 or 9? We can do a spread function where we're going to take what we used prior, and you're going to do 2 interesting things. One, the shoe types are going to become your columns. The arch will still stay the same, and then all the values from that column will be your shoe sizes for all your rows. Alright, so this is something that's pretty useful, almost like a tabulation of what's going on with some form of inventory. So just think of taking those 2 columns. You're going to have one as your key and the other as the value. For us, shoe type was your key and the value was the size, and you're expanding that. But this assumes that we want to use something called a complete, and complete is a little different. We're taking a set of columns and finding all of the combinations that are unique. Okay, fine. What does that even mean? You have a column of interest here, and anything that's unique, and if you notice, you have January through April. But in April of 2011, you didn't have anybody who made any purchases at this point. Same with July. Okay, but what did these original data look like for this? Okay, fine. So we print that out real quick, and we see that we have these months and years. But we need to expand on these and create our unique values. But if you're noticing, I have a character and I have a factor. But why? I kept these in here so you can see the designation. If I were to do the same thing with this complete, having this character string will not evaluate, and you'll get an error. That's why I converted it as a factor. It could have been a date, something that would have made this eligible to be read in correctly for an evaluation to make my ranking, basically. Is that how one way you could think of this? So if we're going to look into dplyr, just understand that it's inside of the tidyverse package or library. And a few things that are very specific that you can use are the filter, select, arrange, mutate, and summarize. These will come up a lot if you're trying to manipulate the data. Understand, filtering works by rows. Select is doing column-wise. So let's take our shoes and let's do a filter. Okay, so we found our first shoe that was with any rows of shoe size less than set 9. Now you can do a filtering of rows with any shoes that are size 9 or greater. For the filtering, any size less than 12. You can do a filter followed by a select, for instance. Let's do a quick arrange, which will allow us to take rows by a specific column. So we could take each of these rows, do it in descending order by the column of shoe size. We can do 2 columns at once if we wanted to for the country and then invoice, where we take the country of descending as well as the invoice date. We can mutate our data, and this is another way of you creating a new variable or a column. So we could do the same thing that we did before by creating that sales total. Just another way of doing it. We could do summarize. Summarize allows us to do some kind of grouping for one or more rows from our data frame, and you're basically using a function like a count or some kind of mean, standard deviation, or something like that you're going to create a new column with. So let's first look at our shoe stuff. So we have our shoes based on our sizes, arch type, and type of shoe. Let's do our summarizing for that. Now we can do our summarizing. So for these shoes, we have a size 7. There's only one of them. Size 9, there's 3, etc. Okay, that's fine. We could count those. Now we have this by size of shoe with arch type and how many of them for this. We have a size 9 with a high arch type and there's 3 of those. A size 10 with a low arch type and there's 2 of those. We could do some nesting and chopping. A nesting creates a list of columns, whereas the chopping will preserve the width. And what does that even look like? This is going to look kind of strange. So let me do 3 different things so you can see it. We take our original data for our shoes. We'll first look at the nesting, where we're taking the shoe type and the arch type and calling this size arch. Let's see what that looks like. Size arch takes in the, this should not be size arch, this should be type. So you're taking the type of shoe and the archlets with it. The type of shoe, the archlets with it. And basically it's nesting it in there. The chopping will chop it at the shoe type and the arch type. So you're breaking those apart and having 2 columns that are still nested together for these, and you could still go backwards and get rid of these, or go backwards and expand these if you wanted. But there's 2 other ways you can manipulate your data. I took an example that we have from the actual tidyr website where they had the original data. Let me do this. Here's the original data, and basically it's going to split here 1, 2, and 3 on the Y and 6, 5, 4 on the Z for this first row, and then 4, 5 for the Y, 3, 2 for the Z, 6, and 1. Alright, and that's getting based off of this column here. There's 3 of the 1s, 2 of the 2s, 1 of the 3s for the X. Okay, so it was only taking them based off the Y and the Z. We could do some pivoting where we're taking our data from above and we're going to pivot and make very similar to what we did before from going from wide to long. This is just another way of doing the same thing we did above for a table that looked like this, okay? We can go from the reverse and go from long to wide. Now if you pay attention to this, these just got kept, but this is shoe type and this is your size. So what did it do here? Let's look at our original data. So here's the data we're taking from above that is wide and we're making it long here. Okay? So you're expanding this out. We can go in the reverse direction and get back to where we are by taking what we did from the long pivot and just make it wide once again. That'll be the conclusion of this video. I'd like to say please like, share, and subscribe. And if you subscribe, please turn on that notification bell. Let me know if there's any topics you have of interest that I could look into. As always, I'll see you in the next video. Bye.